Good afternoon, Washington, D.C. Good afternoon, Washington, and the DMV and the surrounding area. This is Tony Browder, your host, coming to you today for this edition of the Browder File Show. And this show is going to be a little different in that I don't have any guests scheduled. I am going to be opening the phone lines and inviting my listeners to be my guests. I'm inviting you to call in and share what's on your mind and have us have a discussion about things that are important to you. But before we open the phone lines, I want to just talk a little bit about what's on my mind. I would like to begin by once again thanking everyone for listening to this show. I'd like to thank everyone for supporting this station, WPFW. And I really can't overemphasize what has been stated many times by many programmers and officials directly related to the radio station. It's your continued support that makes it possible for hundreds of thousands of people around the world to hear the music and public affairs programming that you won't hear in on most media, most mainstream media, of course. But there's a few outlets that do give you their bent on the news and history and facts and play some non-traditional music. But WPFW is a station where for 48 years you've had a friend. You've had a friend who's had your back. And so I want to thank everyone who has supported the station in our last membership drive, which was an overwhelming success based on all the reports that I've seen, which speaks to the fact that you all are listening, you all are liking what you're hearing, and you're showing your appreciation by supporting the station and supporting those programmers who bring you public affairs programs and music that touches your soul. Music and information that touches your soul at a time when all of our souls can benefit from a gentle touch, a massage here and there, because we have been overwhelmed for these past 8 months in a manner that I've never really experienced in my lifetime. Things are happening every single day. Something new is happening that shakes people to their core and rocks their foundation and really has people evaluating what life is about and more specifically, what America is all about. This is the third week of the federal government's takeover of the District of Columbia. They've made no no what's the word? They have said openly and often their desire to control this city. They've suggested on numerous occasions that this city has been poorly managed, and life has changed dramatically within the past 3 weeks. The streets are being patrolled by National Guards men and women from many southern states with Republican governors, such as Mississippi and Louisiana. And many of the people coming here, some of the people coming here, let me just be a bit more precise in my statement. Some of the people coming here don't have any particular love for people of African ancestry and don't have love for democratic controlled environments. So an opportunity to come in and slap democratic administrations in the face is something that they take great delight in. An opportunity to put Black people in their place is something that they have taken delight in for centuries. And so, you know, this is a new situation, new to many. Those of us who've lived through the 60s and 70s might feel a sense of familiarity with what's happening going on with the National Guards, men and women patrolling the street, now armed with armed vehicles rolling up and down the street. That's a sight that I saw quite a lot of growing up in Chicago in the 1960s. So I'm not surprised by what I'm seeing right now, but I am looking at it through a different lens. And I have friends who live in Prince George's County, Maryland, which borders DC, which is sometimes referred to as the Ninth Ward. I've got friends who are hesitant about driving into DC for fear of being stopped or targeted by police and National Guards people and the FBI and ICE at police checkpoints, which are set up randomly throughout various communities in DC. This past Friday, actually, I heard a story about two Howard University students, two freshman students who had recently moved into the dorm at Howard and were arrested and detained simply because they did not have their IDs on their person when they were stopped by a police official. And so the parent of one of these young men literally had to drive 4 hours to come to Washington to bail her son out of jail. Now, just imagine, the psychological impact that arrest is going to have on that student's family, and their colleagues. So I have not heard very many people talk about how the citizens of DC, particularly the African American citizens of Washington or students in Washington, DC, who are being traumatized by this blatant display of power and manipulation. I'm also interested in the psychological impact that this will have on students, particularly young students, the elementary school, middle school, and high school students in the District of Columbia. How do they feel about how this city is being portrayed and how this city has now been taken over by external forces? Right now, as we heard at the top of the news, the big news story of the day is the latest mass shooting here in the United States of America, shooting at a Catholic church, which has a school, an elementary school, middle school adjoined to the church. And a shooter, a 23-year-old shooter, a white male who I now understand identifies as a female, recently bought a shotgun, a assault rifle, and a handgun, and used all three of these weapons in shooting up this church. The shooting left two children dead, I believe an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old child, and 17 people injured. Many of those people injured were also young students. So, oftentimes we hear about these shootings and shootings and killings. And what we don't really take into account is that with most shootings, mass shootings, there are typically more people injured than are killed. And while emphasis is placed on those who died, we also need to think about how disrupted the lives are of those who were shot and injured. People who will spend days, weeks, maybe months hospitalized, people who have to go through rehabilitation, people who will carry these scars for the rest of their lives. What is the long-term effect of these mass shootings that have become the norm here in the United States of America? This shooting today was the 340th mass shooting of this year. 340 mass shootings in 8 months. And what's also interesting for me is that, you know, when many of these mass shootings occur, I'll get telephone calls, I'll get texts or emails from my friends who live overseas, particularly my friends who live in Africa. And they call expressing concern for my safety. They want to know if I'm all right, if my family is all right. And what's interesting is that all they hear is a mass shooting in the United States, whether it's New York or Philadelphia or LA or Florida. They hear the United States, and many people don't have a real idea as to how large this country is, and so they think that I'm directly impacted by a shooting that takes place 2,000 miles away or less. But that's just, you know, it's something to step outside of this country for a minute and imagine how people who live uh, outside of the United States view what's going on here. These mass murders don't happen anyplace else in the world like they happen here. They don't happen as frequently as they happen here. And everyone's asking the basic question, why are guns so accessible? And why doesn't the government, why aren't politicians doing more to limit people's access to guns? And in order to answer that question, you've got to understand something about U.S. history. and that this country was created with guns. The empire expanded from east to west through the use of guns. People were displaced. Original inhabitants of this land were displaced through guns. People were enslaved and held captives through guns. So, guns in America are as natural as apple pie and baseball, as some folk would say. And so, this obsession with guns, this obsession with people, primarily white people, protecting themselves from criminals is something that really needs to be examined. And maybe at some point in the near future, I'll have one of my psychologists or psychiatrist friends come on the air and talk about this obsession, where it stems from, and how it shows up in this society. So I want to hear from you. We're going to open the phone lines for the first time on the Browder File Show. So I'd like to hear from you. I want to hear what's on your minds. And specifically, I don't want to just hear about problems. Everybody has problems. I'm a person who's interested in solutions to problems. One of the things that my dear friend, psychiatrist Patricia Newton, taught me is that problems are really wonderful things because every problem has a solution. So I spend much of my time problem solving, understanding how problems come up, how they show up in our lives, and then finding ways to neutralize them or minimize them if they aren't there to teach us lessons. So I want to hear, I'd like to hear from some federal workers who've been fired or laid off within the past 7, 8 months. I like to hear from people who may have been stopped in DC by federal officers during this recent crackdown. I really would like to hear from police officers, DC police officers, and what they think about the takeover of their city by federal forces. I'm interested in what people have to say, what people feel about what's going on. I like reading the news. I like hearing what others have to say, outsiders have to say about what's going on here. But it's equally important, if not more important, to hear what the people themselves, the people who live in these environments, have to say about what's going on. So the phone lines are open, and the number to call is 202-588-0893, 202-588-0893. Pick up the phone, and the engineer will patch you through to me, and we'll have a conversation. We'll talk about what's on your mind. So the phone lines are open, and I'm inviting those of you who have enjoyed this show, who have enjoyed some of the guests who have been on this show, to call in and let me know what you think about the show, what you think about some of the guests, and always open to your suggestions as to other guests, other topics that you would like to hear discussed on this show. So while we're waiting for someone to call in, I want to just reflect on an email that I received today from a friend of mine who sends me sends me dozens of emails. Mel Foote. Mel Foote is very well known here in the DMV, in the DC community, in the African community, the diplomatic community. He is the founder of Constituency for Africa. And he sent an email this morning that referenced today is the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Haile Selassie, and that Mel was working in the Peace Corps in Ethiopia at the time. And it was interesting because the first news reports about the death of Selassie um, suggested that he died in his sleep. But upon further investigation, it was discovered that he was actually strangled in his sleep by members of the military who staged a coup d'etat, overthrew the government, and placed a socialist-backed, Russian-backed government in power. So there are all kinds of things happening in the world and have been happening in the world. And it's important to see how these events are remembered, how they are noted by history and by the general public. We are impacted by everything that goes on, and as we've been experiencing this past year, there has been an opening of the floodgates. It's as if all of the demons from hell have been unleashed. And every day there's a new mandate coming down from on high. There's a new executive order that is changing the status quo and is introducing more disorder into what was maybe moderately relatively organized society. But to some people, we're literally seeing the dismantling of this country. We're literally seeing the mask being taken off or the hoods being taken off, and racist politicians, racist business people freely and openly express their profound displeasure for public discourse, their displeasure with government, their displeasure with the federal government, their displeasure with people of color, particularly immigrants now, Hispanic and Latino immigrants. And there's always been this pushback against people of African ancestry. So it's good to know what people are thinking. What's also important is to be able to formulate thoughts yourself based on accurate information, based on historical information, not just listening to podcasts and radio stations that drum a certain mentality or consciousness in your head and give you certain talking points that then determine your world view. It's important for free people, if they really value their freedom, to be able to listen to a number of voices and to be able to formulate their own opinion about what is truth, their own opinion about what matters to them based on investigating multiple sources and then bringing that investigation to our interpretation, to our analysis of what goes on in our world and what shapes our world. I think in terms of the things that have been going on within our school system. For example, I'm old enough to remember growing up in elementary school and high school when they had civics courses, when there were classes that were taught to teach people what it meant to live in a civil society, in a democracy, and the rights and responsibilities that every citizen has in order to make the most of their lives and make the most of their country. I'm old enough to remember when we had driver's ed, when there was a course set aside in high school where we were taught the rules of the road and were taught how to drive on the street. And in the absence of these programs, in the dismantling of the Department of Education, we no longer have programs which prepared young people to become responsible adults. And as a consequence, we see, at least here in DC, we see people driving as if they were never trained on how to drive an automobile, running red lights, making illegal turns, and speeding unnecessarily. And the driving situation, the traffic situation has gotten so bad in DC primarily that they have placed these white vertical posts along certain streets in order to prevent people from making a right-hand turn before they reach the intersection, or to make sure that people stay in their lanes. This is something new, and it's something that I think is indicative of the consequences of the dumbing down of America, of certain information being taken out of the classroom, and young people not being taught what it means to be responsible, what it means to be respectful, what it means to be a part of a society that is preparing to receive you as a citizen who's going to make a contribution to the continued development, to the continued good of this country, of this state, of this city. These are things that were valued at one point in time, and now with the dismantling of many of these systems that were designed to socialize citizens of this country, I see things falling by the wayside. And I can't help but think, I can't help but believe that all of this is intentional. I'm not a person prone to believe in accidents or coincidences. Everything that happens in this country happens by design. Very few things are left to chance. And many of these designs were designs that were uh, formulated years in advance and slowly rolled out over time. And the rolling out of these plans is usually done after due consideration of the pros and cons, sometimes after these plans have been um, tested on audiences, groups who are brought into to sessions who ask their opinion about certain thoughts and ideas and happenings. It shapes the policies that are implemented in cities and states throughout the country. So many of the things that are happening now are a direct result of things that were set in motion years ago or decades ago. That's how the world runs. That's how the world has always run. And so when I see certain things happening now, the proliferation of guns in our community, I know that that's not an accident. I know that there are people who live to ensure that guns will be readily available, even if there are mass shootings in certain cities or certain parts of the country. That has not stopped the flow of guns into communities. So I'm still waiting for someone to call in. My engineer is on board and they will let me know if we have a caller. Until someone does call in at 202-588-0893, I'll continue talking about what's on my mind. Um, that's one of the benefits of having a show. I get a chance to talk about thoughts that interest me. I get a chance to reach out to colleagues and friends and associates who are experts in certain fields that are of interest to me, who certainly know more about certain subject matters than I do, and I can bring them on to share their expertise. And as I've been preparing my lineup for my fall shows in September and October, I've been reaching out to a broad cross section of experts um, who I'll bring on the show to talk about subject matters that I think would be of interest to you. And one of my deepest concerns is how people shape our perceptions of self and our perceptions of reality. You know, I spent a lot of time in the arts field. Um, my primary career was as a artist, a graphic designer. I've worked at a couple of advertising agencies, and I understand very clearly that most of what we see, most of what we hear, most of the information that filters into our eyes and our ears is information that has been conceived of and shaped by people that we will never know. Um, I've shared this story before, but one of the best years of my life was, I think, the summer of 1972, when I did an internship at a advertising agency in Chicago, Foot Cone and Belding Advertising, and I had an opportunity to work with writers and directors and art directors, and just watch men sit in the session, talk about ideas for an advertising campaign for a particular product, see the copy men write the copy for the ads, watch the ads get developed, see the art directors come up with artistic themes for the ads, whether they were going to be a cartoon commercial on television. You know, one of the clients that they had was Raid, so I had a chance to work with the guys who did the Raid commercials with the various insects, the flies, the mosquitoes, and the ants yelling Raid, and watch how they develop those advertisements. And then also work with some of the directors who scripted ads with people, with families, and just watch that whole setup. And whenever the work was slow, I would go down to the viewing room and just watch commercials for hours on end, watch commercials. And that experience made me aware of the fact that many of the people who produce content that we see on television or hear on the radio are people that we will never meet. And this content has been debated, worked on, discussed by people within certain advertising agencies weeks, months, or years in advance. And by the time the public sees these ads or hears these ads on the radio, they're already working on another campaign. And so being in that environment made me aware of the extent to which our lives are shaped by people outside, people that we don't know, people that we will never meet. And as a consequence, it made me begin to look at how my thinking was programmed, right? Um, um, I think in terms of Dr. Carter G. Woodson's book, The Miseducation of the Negro, the reality is everybody in this country has been miseducated. Everybody in this country continues to be miseducated to this very day. And once you understand that someone else has control of determining the thoughts and determining the images that will shape your reality, that made me, as a young, inquisitive person, want to exercise more control over shaping my own thoughts, determining what I embraced as factual, as true, as historically relevant. And ultimately, that is what drove me towards an interest in in African history and specifically into Nile Valley history. I've shared this story before, and it's worth repeating. Oftentimes, people ask me what got me started, what got me interested in traveling to Egypt and studying Egyptian history and culture. And I can go back to February the 21st, 1977, when I met Dr. Ivan Van Sertima for the first time. He was giving a presentation on his
Yeah,
newly
Macaulay.
published book, They Came Before Columbus. And let me put a pin in that thought. I was informed that we have a caller, so let me bring the caller up, invite you to come on air and tell us your name and where you're calling from. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Browder
Yeah,
File.
thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Jason. I'm calling from Washington D.C.
Yes, sir. Jason, how are you?
Good, good. Um, Talking about the polarization in America currently, and with everything going on in D.C., I was curious what your thoughts might be on what you think has contributed the most to the polarization that we have currently, whether it be people that either felt like that didn't vote or voted third party,
Mm-hmm.
or that might have potentially enabled in a sense, or um, the polarization from just from both sides, um,
Sure, sure, sure.
the far sides, whether it be the people that were kind of stuck in the middle or kind of apathetic, or the ones that I don't want to take the focus or the onus away from the people that did support the current, but I wonder what your thoughts are on which other party, which other group may have influenced or led to this current right now,
Sure.
people that
Well,
were in the middle or the people that were far left.
great. Well, Jason, I appreciate your question, and please stay on the line because I want to expand my response and not just uh, respond based on what's happening now, what's been happening within the last 8 years politically and socially. I first came to Washington D.C. in 1971. I moved here from Chicago to attend Howard University. And growing up as a young person, as an African American male in Chicago, I grew up knowing that Chicago was the most racially segregated city in the United States of America. I grew up being jumped on by gangs of white people for being in the wrong side of town. I also grew up being jumped on by black folk for being in the wrong side of town. So I saw both sides of the spectrum. And when I came to DC, I was amazed. I came to DC again in 1971, in the summer of 1971, and I was surprised to see how much poverty there was in DC. And I lived at 16th and S Street Northwest. I walked down Florida Avenue every day on my way to Howard University. And in 1971, the corner of 14th and U looked like Beirut. It was the buildings that had been burnt during the assassination of Dr. King had not been restored, and I couldn't fathom the fact that this is the nation's capital, and this is what this capital, the most powerful nation in the world, looks like today. Walking past 14th and U every day. Back in 1971, there were still prostitutes out on the street in the day and in the evening. And what I also noticed living in that neighborhood is that on the weekends, I would often see cars with congressional plates, black limos with congressional plates, drive up and pick up these women of the night and take them off. And it helped me to really understand the world in which I was living. The other thing I'll share with you, which again shapes, my response to your question, is that walking from 16th and S down Florida Avenue to Georgia Avenue to attend Howard University, I passed dope dealers and drug addicts on the regular. And it dawned on me, thinking back to when I lived in Chicago, how similar this area of Washington, D.C. was to my community in Chicago, on the west side of Chicago. And it ultimately dawned on me that, within 2 weeks, I knew who the drug dealers were. I knew if I was interested in getting drugs, I knew where I can get any drug that I wanted. And it suddenly dawned on me as a 19-year-old young man that if I know who the drug dealers are and where the drugs could be purchased, the police certainly do. And I began to realize that the drugs are in certain communities for a reason. They serve a purpose. Guns are in certain communities because they serve a purpose. Crime is in certain communities because they serve a purpose. So this is the context to which I've seen America all of my life, all 74 years that I've lived. And so I can say that things today are not much different than they were 50 years ago. We just see more of it. And we see more of it because we have more means of communicating and sharing information via the internet and social media and things of that nature. But as an African American male, I can say that most of the events in my life and many of the events in America have been driven by race, have been driven by money and attempts by people with power to hold on to their power. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, partially. I guess, and I agree. Those are really good points as well, and it definitely gives the credence of your history and your experience here in DC, and just growing up as a black man. And I guess would you say that there's? I guess you did say that the polarization from that standpoint, that's always been there. I guess lately I've been from family members and friends, I've been hearing a lot of kind of assigning blame or trying to make sense of where we are at,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to say, okay, well, how do we respond? Is it we need to convince the people that are kind of stuck in the middle or tuned out, or is it that those that they voted for Harris, that some people want a more centrist candidate and some people want a more progressive candidate, and so
Mm-hmm.
I guess what would you kind of say to I guess saying, this is where we need to focus the attention. We need to focus in the middle, and those people that have kind of
Sure.
felt silenced or just don't care or don't think their voice matters anymore, or
Right.
to focus in on the people that maybe are increasing the polarization.
Well, Jason, again, what shapes my perspective of the world is my youth and specifically growing up in Chicago in the 1960s. I have said often that I think the 1960s were one of the most important decades of the 20th century. And that things happened during the 60s that are still reverberating through time and space at this very moment. And that many of the things that happened in the 60s were racially related. And so what I've learned, particularly as someone who has an interest in history, and political science is not my thing, but I do listen to political scientists. And what's clear to me is that there's not been much difference between Republicans or Democrats. They essentially do the same thing, but their methodologies are different, but the end results are the same. And by the end results, I mean Black folk are still at the bottom of every social metric in this country. So our condition has not changed, even when there was a Black president in the White House. And so it makes me aware of the fact that there are certain limitations placed on politicians. And particularly when we look at what's happening right now with this current administration, they're really showing you the extent to which big business controls the politics on a local, on a state, and on a federal level. Big business. So we're seeing it. We're seeing it with seeing the relationship that Elon Musk had with this current administration and how much money he put into ensuring the outcome of this election. We're seeing it with reports about Peter Thiel and what he has done to frame the consciousness of the sitting vice president of the United States. He is a tool. He was shaped by him and people like him. So what's really coming to light now is the extent to which I guess the term that they're using now is dark money. The extent to which dark money has shaped this political landscape. And truth be told, this dark money has always shaped the political and social landscape. And so the question is, invariably, is what are the people going to do? Again, growing up in the 60s, I remember the marches, I remember the demonstrations, I remember the protests. That's a part of my consciousness. And what I've come to understand is that when the people get fed up with being abused and mistreated and they act out, there's always a response. And so, what is important at this particular point in time in history, with this current administration in power, how people act out is important because you don't want to act out such that your actions will be lead to a page in their playbook and allow them to come back and hit harder and heavier than ever before. You want to be strategic. And with regards to people being strategic, people have to be willing to be involved. People have to
Got two
really
callers.
care on a gut level. So yeah, so those are my thoughts on that subject matter. But Jason, I want to thank you, and you hold the distinction of being the very first caller on the Browder File Show. We've got a couple of other callers we want to hear from, so we'll go to the next caller now. Good afternoon, caller. Who are you, and where are you calling from?
Good day, Brother Browder. This is Rick calling you long distance
From
from.
Germany. Rick, I want to do two things. One, I want you to leave a number or an email where I can get in contact with you because I've had, you and I listen to this station quite a bit, and I hear you call in frequently. And I mentioned to a couple of programmers that I would like to have a conversation with you. I want to know who Rick is. I want to know what interests you to call in from Germany to share your opinion about what's happening in DC and what's happening in this country. So if you have no objections to that, if you can leave a contact number or information with the engineer, and I want to reach out to you and invite you to come on at some point in the future and have a personal conversation with our audience. Is that fair? Is that something you're willing to do?
That's reasonable. I left my number for Roach Brown, and somehow it didn't get through to him. But I will try again. What you say sounds fair and reasonable.
Well, I tell you what, Rick, in order to ensure that I get the number, email your contact information to browderfile@yahoo.com, BROWDER file, FILE, at yahoo.com. So I'll get that email and I will reach out to you personally.
Okay. My comments today concern what you said about things having not changed in the last 60 years or so. I agree with you to a point, but there are members of the black middle class who would push back against us and suggest that your own success, not only as a college student, but as someone who has traveled the world, someone who has excavated there in Egypt and been given that privilege, that you speak to the success of our race over the last 60 years. I I rejoice in your success, but I also know that poverty, drug use, depression, fatherlessness, that has increased as well. I was born at Walter Reed Army Medical Hospital, and my mother was taken advantage of by members of the intelligence community, women in particular, white and Jewish women in particular. MK Ultra was
Mhm.
practiced on my family there in Southeast Washington, D.C. But I was saved by a number of Adventist nurses and brother soldiers coming out of the military in the early 70s while you were just a student at Howard University. They were shepherding my life to make sure that MK Ultra did not destroy my life. Brother man, my mother-in-law here in Germany, a white woman, is bleeding from the nose in stress because of the things that are coming upon the world, not only here in Germany, but there in Washington, D.C., not only with Donald Trump, but the mass shootings around the country. Brother man, I think young people are smart enough not to go for the okey doke and attack the police and the military and the National Guard that has been placed before them as a temptation to rile them up. I'm done, brother man.
Okay, well, listen, man, thank you so much for your comments. I always appreciate you calling in to any program, and I will reach out to you and we'll have an extensive conversation with Rick in the near future. Thank you so much. Let's go to the next caller. Welcome to the Browder File. Who are you and where are you calling from? Maybe we don't have another caller? Yes, yes, you're on the air. How are you?
Oh, I'm wonderful. This is Phil from Upper Marlboro.
Phil from Upper Marlboro. Well, thank you, Phil. I appreciate you calling. What do you have to
Yeah,
share with us?
right. Well, I'm always thinking about this big picture, and I'm thinking about how we are in this situation that we're in, and basically it's because of our lack of understanding of history, and because we're so susceptible to the elements of fear and ego, and so we just do not understand that in this country there is a left wing, and the left wing is blue. There is a right wing. The right wing is red. There is no bird that can fly with one wing. These people work in conjunction together. And if we're not going to study history and then try to understand politics, because from what I'm seeing now, there were always big boys on the table, let's say, the U.S. and Russia. And they played that game, the Cold War thing, for all these
Absolutely. Absolutely.
years.
Well,
And
Rick,
it's
let me ask you something, man. As someone, you
mhm.
mentioned history twice in your comments. So obviously, you read, you study history, and one of my favorite comments from one of my favorite historians, Dr. John Henry Clark, says that all history is a current event. So what's happening today is not new. It's been happening, as you suggested. So as someone who is a student of history, I'm sure you know that you study history in order to understand how you got where you are and how to prepare for where you want to go. So, given that reality, then what would you suggest are some of the things that people can do given the historical realities that we were born into? What can we do to change the dynamic or maybe influence outcomes and ensure that they're a bit more favorable to our liking?
Well, I really wish I had that answer. I've
No,
thought
no,
about
no. With thought, you don't have to have an answer. You don't have to, please, just a thought, because I'm sure you've
it.
given it some thought. So I'm just giving you an
Okay,
opportunity to share your thoughts. You don't have to have any answers, brother.
okay, okay. I think that we all have to have a the same or very similar mindset. When Hidden Colors 1 first came out, I I had the CD and I made over 80 copies. I know that was wrong, but I did. And I passed them out on the train and to everybody that I knew.
Mm.
And one of the things from here to Florida, and one of the things that I found was that the minute they got to many people, not all, but the minute they got to the religious part, they stopped watching.
Mm-hmm.
People told me this, and I kind of figured it out. So they tell me, oh, I saw a little bit of it, but didn't see all of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand that when you don't know your history, then a great hindrance to us is Christianity. We don't want to
Well,
accept that.
yeah.
We
So
don't.
so look, so Phil, since you mentioned Hidden Colors, let me just share a historical fact with you, because you know history is a broad subject matter, and everybody can benefit from a greater understanding and appreciation of history and how it's written and how it's structured. Um, I was in two of the Hidden Colors series, and Hidden Colors had come out. I hadn't seen it. One of the producers called me up and asked me if I would be interested in being in Hidden Colors 2. And so I said, well, look, to be honest with you, I need to see Hidden Colors 1 before I agree to be in it. I saw it and I saw what they were doing. I saw the benefits and I saw the flaws in what they were doing. So when I talked to the producer again, I shared with him my honest opinion about the first one, Hidden Colors 1. There was some sound information that was historically accurate. There was some information that could be easily misinterpreted, and there was information that was blatantly incorrect. And so the producer was kind of startled. And he said, "What do you mean this is inaccurate?" I said, "Listen, give me a week, and I will make a list of these three categories: what is historically correct, what is partially correct and could be easily misinterpreted, and what is blatantly wrong." So we had that third conversation, and I shared my list with him, and he was blown away because he had no idea. Now, here's someone who has produced a documentary on history who doesn't even know history himself. And the thing that really got him was that I shared with him that many of the comments that were made in Hidden Colors 1, the comments that were made by Kaba Kameni and Phil Valentine, when they talked about the African presence in Asia, I said 90% of what they said came from Runoko Rashidi and Wayne Chandler. And do you know that this director said who? He had never heard of Runoko Rashidi and Wayne Chandler. So this whole issue of history being important is important, but the understanding of history of people who share and present your history is even more important. So if you don't know anything, that little bit that you do know is going to be shared with people and can potentially cause more harm than good. So, needless to say, I had some concerns about the Hidden Color series once I dug into the works of Tariq Nasheed, and I stopped after Hidden Colors 4 and backed out because I saw that he was not doing with the information and the profile that he was raising as a result of having produced that series. He was not using this knowledge for the benefit of the public as I thought or felt that he should. So I backed away. But your point about people not understanding history, man, is more than just the history of religion. It's the history of every aspect of life. And one of the
Right.
good things about Hidden Colors that I can share with you, and matter of fact, I had a conversation with James Small when I consulted with him as to whether or not I should do Hidden Colors, and he just shared with me how impactful Hidden Colors 1 was, and that many people who did watched that documentary and were moved by that documentary were moved to watch other documentaries and read books that they would not have heard of, that they were not familiar with or would not have read under normal circumstances. So I saw the benefit of that series, and that's why I agreed to participate in two. But when I saw that the producers of that series were not moving in a direction that I thought would be favorable to the target audience, that is African Americans, I backed away.
Yeah. Well, I can appreciate that. I think that if we're not going to read, it's good to have hidden colors and any other little thing on Facebook or whatever people are doing, social media.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that we do not read, that's the thing. See, we still thinking the world is 6,000 years old when there is a ton of information out here that will enlighten us to the fact and archaeological evidence that the world is older than 5,500 years.
Right, right.
But, but, but if we are not going to read, then that's a problem. And so here's one thing I thought.
So Phil, wait, before you go on to the one thing, I want you to drill down into that problem for a minute, and I want to share with you a historical fact. In the history of humankind, there has never been a time when the majority of people were reading. Up until the probably the early 20th century, majority of people in the world were illiterate, couldn't read.
Mm-hmm.
So reading does have value, but what's even equally, if not more important, are socialization systems that
Right.
socialize people to contribute to the betterment of humanity. That's to me is more important than reading itself.
Absolutely. Well, reading is important. I think
No
when I look
question.
at it, there was like a moral code within all communities around the world, whether Native American, African, it doesn't matter. There was a moral code. People couldn't
Hmm.
read, but people had an understanding of right and wrong.
People
Basic.
were social, and that understanding came about as a result of socialization. They
Yeah.
were trained, they were indoctrinated. And I must say that religion, for 98% of the people on the planet, religion was the means of giving them their morals. Even with the issues with
Right.
religion, it served as a place where people learn what to do and what not to do, and the punishment that would befall you if you did things that violated the laws of God.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's kind of what we lost. We all have this background of where we came from and where we grew up at. And certainly I have mine being from the projects in Southeast DC.
Hmm.
I'm 70 now, and I understand how it was back then. People swept the fronts.
Yeah,
Everybody knew each other. There was a moral code that existed. There was a way that you treated women. There was a way that you talked to the elderly.
exactly. So
Everything.
Phil,
Right.
you and I are close in age, and we grew up at a time when we still had families living in communities, right?
Yeah.
Where
Right.
where everybody on the block was either directly or indirectly related to you and or responsible to you. And I'm
Right.
sure you can recall growing up at a time when respecting your race or honoring your race was an important thing to everybody in your community. And
That's
with
right.
the advent of integration, that was destroyed. That was wiped out. And we have what we
Now,
have today.
and I would say not only advent of integration, but back then we were all on the bus, most of us. And because you were on the bus, that means you had to walk down the street. You had
Hmm.
to walk past neighbors. You had to walk to the store. And so your neighbors knew who you belonged to.
Exactly.
Now we get a little money
Mm.
and we get a little cars. And certainly that has caused or has helped with the disconnection because now, we don't even know our neighbors.
True, true,
We
true.
just bypass them. And
Right,
we're living in this society that says anything goes. Be
right,
whoever you want to be, and nobody can say anything about it. So there is no community code. There is no moral code. The way that we dress, we act. You can't go anywhere without hearing profanity.
right. So
On this,
Phil, listen, man, I appreciate you calling, And I need to cut you off now because we're coming toward the end of this program. But I do appreciate your call. It was good chopping it up with you. And I hope you'll call in when I open up phone lines again. So thank you so much, brother. I appreciate you. And I appreciate your support of WPFW because I know if you're a listener, you are a supporter, correct? All right. But one of the things that Phil said before I close this show is he talked about the times when many people rode the bus, took public transportation to the store, to school, to work. So you knew your neighbors. People in the community knew each other, spoke to each other. In some sense, I see a return to that with gentrification. We're now seeing new people moving into the community. We're now seeing driving lanes restricted and bicycle lanes and jogging lanes being established. We're now seeing bicycles and scooters being set up on street corners so that people are now encouraged to use personal public transportation, right? A bicycle or a scooter or walk. So we are, in some respects, getting back to that, and we're getting back to a new sense of community. It's just that there's not a lot of diversity in these new communities that are forming in inner cities all throughout the United States. And that speaks to a problem and opportunities to resolve these problems that are coming our way. But the key to resolving any problem is an acknowledgement of the problem, and two, a commitment on the part of individuals to address these issues. So look, this was the first time we've done the Browder File Show where we invited you callers to call in. I want to thank Jason. I want to thank Rick. I want to thank Phil for calling in and adding some light to this show. Next month, September, we've got some guests that we'll have on who will expand our understanding of how to live in and deal with these times, these unusual times that we're living in. So I've got some experts, some psychologists. I had a conversation with a neuroscientist today who I'm looking forward to have on the show to talk about how you can use certain neuro strategies to map out how you can use your brain to negotiate life. So I've got some good program coming for you in the fall. We'll have another Players Drive in the fall, and we look forward to your continued support in the fall, in the winter, and throughout this coming new year. The only way that we can deal with these challenges that we're confronted with is to address them head on. So I thank you for your support. And as always, I leave you with the sound, the inspiration, the wisdom of Maurice White, Earth, Wind, and Fire, telling you to love you because it's all about love. Peace, and I'll see you next Wednesday.